Buongiorno signori e signori, buongiorno, un caloroso benvenuto all'Accademia Britannica. Io sono Christopher Smith, sono il direttore qui e volevo solo dire qualche parola all'inizio di questo convegno molto importante qui all'Accademia. I'm not going to torture the Italian language any further. It's not so much a matter of translation as interpretation when it comes to my Italian, so I'll move to English. The first thing, just in a very practical sense, the British School at Rome is not predicting to have any fire alarms or anything like that. So if something does happen, then you should probably leave. And you can do so through the door there, or through the door there, or here. Secondly, as many of you will know, halfway through today we have a rather important visitor, and that visit will be taking place in a foyer where you just were this morning, from about 11:30 till towards 2. All the routes have been planned and everything for you so that you can enjoy your conference and have your coffee and everything. But if you do see some closed doors and so forth, it's for a good reason. So if you please respect those whilst we get on with the other part of our activity during today, and then we'll all be able to gather later on in the day for the rest of our activities. I just want to say how very, very pleased I am that this conference and exhibition is taking place here at the British School at Rome. We've been on this site for almost exactly 100 years. This is the beginning of our second century in Via Gramsci. And the course of that time, I think one of the most significant transformations, particularly in recent years, has been the growing importance of modern studies for the British School at Rome, the increasing centrality of modern studies and literary studies for the British School at Rome. We've always had a very strong focus on visual arts. It has been a core part of our activity, but we now see, I think, much more clearly the British School at Rome as playing a part across the whole range of humanities and social sciences, from prehistory to the contemporary, and humanities understood in a most generous sense to include visual representations. It was therefore with great pleasure that we accepted the invitation to be part of this extraordinary project, which is making such a difference to the way that we understand modern languages and the way that modern languages have a role to play methodologically and intellectually. And I think it's a very important occasion for us, and I hope one which will genuinely fulfill the role that it has been given as a beacon. It's a beacon project, but I think it genuinely is a beacon. I can say that in November we will be trying to host a meeting of art historians, which will be trying to replicate the success of this project for another discipline area of art history, and I think that there's something very important that's happening here. So my compliments to everybody who's organised this, my very great thanks to everyone who has done such a lot of work to bring this together, and I wish you an extremely successful and interesting conference, and with great pleasure passo la parola a Charles Burdett. Grazie.
I'd first like to express our warmest gratitude to the British School, which has been a splendid partner and supportive in everything that we've attempted to do here. Before I say a little bit more about the project, I'm going to pass the word to Charles Forsdick, who is the theme leader of the Arts and Humanities Research Council initiative on translating cultures. And of course it is under this umbrella that our own project and initiative is functioning. So Charles.
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you, Christopher, for your welcome and for hosting this event. I'm a professor of French, so I'm not going to attempt to speak in Italian, but and I apologize for that. Just a few words of welcome on behalf of the Arts and Humanities Research Council. You've all got the blue bags on the way in. For those of you who aren't familiar with the AHRC, it's the UK funder of research, both in practice-based arts, but also in the area of the humanities more generally. As Charles has just said, as part of the AHRC's work for the past 5 years, we've been funding the theme Translating Cultures. Translating Cultures is very much about the ways in which, in a world increasingly characterized by the very stuff of this conference, transnational mobility, cross-cultural exchange, in that world, the need for understanding across languages and cultures is more urgent than ever. In about the 100 projects funded under Translating Cultures, and they really cover the complete spectrum of the arts and humanities, from law to history of art, from the softer side of international relations to education. We've researchers looking at the immediate contemporary context, looking at the multiplicity of languages and cultures in contact in the contemporary world. But we've also a number of projects looking at historical precedents and foundations, considering this idea of translating cultures in the modern world, the early modern world, the medieval world, and of course the classical world. Translation, and this will be borne out throughout the conference, I think, is understood in its widest senses, not just in terms of interlingual and intralingual configurations of languages, but also looking at translation across media. We have a very interesting cluster of projects looking at translation of music and also translation of the visual arts. But there's also an interest in the circulation, the translation of stories, of artifacts, of values and ideas. Also central to Translating Cultures is the idea of translating research, not just across disciplines, but also across the divide between academic research and wider society. And there's a real emphasis in the theme on practice, on co-creation of research, and indeed on questioning the divide between the academy and the wider world. That's why I'm absolutely delighted that we're also here to celebrate the opening of the exhibition of Transnationalizing Modern Languages, looking precisely at the variety of vehicles available for that translation of high-quality academic research to a multiplicity of audiences. As Christopher's just said, Transnationalizing Modern Languages really is an extraordinary project. It's one of the 3 beacon projects associated with Translating Cultures, and it's unprecedented in the UK arts and humanities in terms of its size and complexity. And as you'll see over the next 3 days, there are multiple sites and partners, and I've very much relished the opportunity over the past 3 years to learn a lot from the Transnationalizing Modern Languages team about diaspora, about transnational connections, and about the ways in which increasingly we need to uncouple single nations from single languages and to explore what happens when languages and cultures exceed their geographical and territorial confines and operate through what's central to this project, that process of rewriting, reworking of tradition, of nation, and of narration. Also important to Transnationalizing Modern Languages is creativity and the forms of engagement and translation of research that reflection on the creative act and the collaboration that allows permits. Just to conclude, since we launched Translating Cultures, and indeed since Transnationalizing Modern Languages was launched 3 years ago, there have been unprecedented and in some ways unimaginable shifts in the socio-political context in which we're operating. Human mobility across the Mediterranean has clearly reached unimaginable proportions. In the UK, I shan't dwell on this, but in June we made a monumental decision about our relationship to Europe. The US election has seen discourse in public debate unleashed, which I think in the recent past would have been unimaginable. We've seen, and I don't think these are unlinked, a rise in xenophobia, legitimized in mainstream political discourse. We've seen a building of walls, a proliferation of borders, and in the UK, and I think in the US as well, we've seen the consolidation of forms of linguophobia and the reassertion of ideological monolingualism, which are reaching alarming levels. Transnationalizing modern languages forms part, for me, of an arts and humanities perspective, which seeks to understand that rapidly changing situation, to place it within its historical perspective, and crucially to offer practical, realistic, but hopeful research-based solutions. I don't think this is just a matter of acknowledging the multilingual reality of the contemporary world. I also think it's part of a reminder of the need to study and, crucially, to teach the languages of hospitality and welcome, crucial to the survival of the values that many of us hold dear in the contemporary world. So many thanks to Transnationalizing Modern Languages for the invitation to share in the next 3 days. I wish you well for the conference and for the exhibition.
As Charles has said, the times in which we live are, and over the last 3 years, have changed very rapidly. And the question that we pose with our project, the title of which, of course, is Transnationalizing Modern Languages, is to ask how our disciplines are adequate to the realities that we face. In part, the title Transnationalizing Modern Languages gestures to the fact that in some ways the fact that modern languages is organized according to departments of French, German and Italian, that though we try not to, we do in some ways perpetuate a notion of studying cultures as containers, that is, cultures contained within territorially defined spaces. If one does so, and we all need to be aware of that risk, then we do face the danger of repeating rather than critiquing ethno-national narratives. Clearly, we do live in nations, and as Charles said, or implied, no one in the UK needs to be reminded that the ghost of the nation state is alive and well. But nations are only, of course, part of a vastly more complicated reality. As human beings, we are mobile. We live within economic, cultural, and religious systems, material forces, and webs of signification that stretch back, in many cases, across millennia. We move sometimes out of choice, but often of necessity, and our experience or perception of mobility alerts us to the existence of structures that exert very considerable power, whether that is material, intellectual, or emotional. The world that we create, and which at the same time acts back on us, is both national and transnational. If we think in terms of the transnational and the transcultural, and part of the whole initiative of translating cultures is to do so, then clearly we need to think beyond notions of culture as place-bound. A deterritorialized notion of culture enables us to gain a sharper perception of how culture is in movement, how culture is unstable, how culture is hybrid. La cultura è meticcia, as one of the people we interviewed in Addis Ababa rightly said. Culture is in continual creation. New cultures, new experiences, new ways of being in the world come into being through the transcultural moment. And by doing or focusing on this, we sharpen our perception of the forces that operate within and between and throughout cultures. We also become conscious, and this, of course, is part of the central part of the theme, of how we inhabit a world in which all the time we are translating one way of understanding reality into the terms of another. The focus on the transnational leads us to think of translation not as a temporary or specialized activity, but as an inevitable and habitual practice of the everyday. If we think in terms of the transnational or the transcultural, then we think differently about time. We become conscious of different interlocking temporalities that certainly exert a pressure on the way in which we think about the past. The past, of course, changes depending on the questions that we ask of it, but also on the ways in which we attempt, and this could not be more topical, we attempt to grasp the future. We certainly see the external world, the world that changes around us, in a multiplicity of perspectives, whether that is at a local level or when we attempt to gain an understanding of more macro phenomena and the way they are played out at a local level. The humanly constructed world both obeys and does not obey borders that are imposed upon it. Thinking about the transnational leads us inevitably to explore how selfhood is shaped both in the past and in the present, and how we frame our understanding of the perpetual motion of self-creation. If subjectivity is about negotiation, performance, appropriation, then all of these technologies of the self, to quote Foucault, occur within a context of accelerated globalization. To pose the question of the transnational is also to ask how we think of and represent ourselves and other people. The narratives that we sustain our identity and the identifications that we make about others. As our language changes, so our self-experience and our sense of alterity does. The aim of the project, such as ours, is not to disseminate truth and light, but to facilitate an expanding dialogue on the questions that lie at its core. The research, as Charles said, of the project is co-produced with individuals and with communities with which we've been in contact. We're particularly grateful to the associations, many of which we are all the time in contact, such as the Archivio Memorie Migranti, with who have contributed in every way to the growing body of research. And this brings me to the purpose of the conference, which is to expand the conversation in new directions, to set up connections with people working on different but related themes or in different parts of the globe, so that, as we said in our call, we can examine the notion of Italianness and how it has been dynamically reformulated and performed by individual and collective subjects in relation both to models associated with the nation and those emerging from specific local context, so that we broaden the frame in which we read Italian history and culture, considering the multiple levels of their negotiation, mediation and remediation. So this conversation, which we begin now, is fundamental to our project. And I'll pass the word now to Loredana.
Right. Well, thank you again to all of you for being here. I think what you can gather from all of this is that a project such as TML, as we call it for short, because otherwise it's too long, is both incredibly daunting and incredibly rewarding. It has been daunting to hold together such different streams and so many different people. And I used to go around saying that the project was going to take us from the Orkneys to Tasmania, and indeed it has. We have covered that width and that breadth of the world. It's indicative, I think, that so many people who are here have found ways of connecting to the project, and we couldn't have done what we've done over the past 2 years and what we continue to do and what we hope to continue to do without an incredible number of collaborations with other academics. And I hope, and we all hope, that this conference will spark off new connections as well as continue to consolidate the ones that we already have, but also collaborations with artists, collaborations with art curators, collaborations with painters, theatre makers, and a number of them will be here with us. I'm looking at Lucy at the back, who will be one of the two people doing performances during this conference, and we have, of course, Elena, of course, Bellantoni tonight. We have works in the exhibition that you will see tonight, and we're all waiting to see it. We saw a bit of it yesterday, but we still haven't seen it in its entirety ourselves. So we're all excited to be able to see that as really an example, we hope, of how we can collaborate, co-create, that's the word that Charles Burdett and Charles Forzik have both used, co-create and find ways of documenting how the research that we carry out as academics really is related to people's lives, to our own lives in the first instance, and to the way in which we can try to change the world. It's an interesting moment to be doing this kind of work. Again, you know, my two colleagues have spoken about that. I think we have to continue to work towards a way in which what we do is relevant. And I, for one, will be eternally grateful, for instance, to the two curators, to Viviana and Julia, whom I'm sure you will meet. Well, you will meet them later today, you'll meet them tonight, for having pushed us constantly as part of the research team of this project to think about our own relationship to what we do as academics, to think about our affective relationship, our intellectual relationship, our engagement with what we do and with how we can present that to people. So if I'll take away something from this project, it will be also that deep thinking about the way in which we do research and the way in which we present the research that we do to multiple audiences. I want to say just a couple of words in addition to what my colleagues have already said on translation. I am a translation studies specialist. For me, translation is a core activity in what I do, but it's also really a lens through which I see the world. And I tend to think of translation as the texture, the fabric of our lives, something that is deeply embedded in so much of what we do. This project has allowed us to look at translation as really a continuum, from interlingual translation, the movement between languages, all the way to how we translate, indeed, our feelings, our affects, our ways of seeing the world into different languages and different media. So in that sense, too, I think we are trying to do something that enriches our understanding of how we should look at translation and of that continuum. Thinking about, and another of the colleagues in one of the other two Beacon projects under Translating Cultures, Alison Phipps, talks about unmooring languages. And of course, if you unmoor languages, they travel in different ways, but hopefully they also find new moorings, new significances in our life. Now, a couple more things before I stop, just to say that we want this conference to be very much part of that overall project of being a collective endeavor. So we're looking to you to give us new ideas, and we're looking to you to also tell us what you think of the work that we have done. So amongst other things, and I'm sure Barbara will say more about this in a second, we want your reactions, we want your comments, and we will pester you, I warn you from now, about giving us some feedback. It's not, I promise, feedback in the worstest of senses, i.e., some cold sort of ticking boxes kind of thing. We really want to know what your reactions are to what you will be seeing, what you will be hearing over the next 2-3 days. It's important to us because it really helps us build new connections. And the very last thing that I wanted to say, because we talked about the significance of what we do and trying to open up new avenues, is that the latest thing that has happened in the TML sort of cycle in the TML history is that although we formally are coming towards the end of a project, of course, something like this, we keep saying, will keep us busy probably for the rest of our lives. And we are now also looking to take some of the work that we've been doing, some of that work that started from an idea of looking at Italian cultures, but took us in so many other directions. We're going to take that also into developing countries. We're going to be working next with Namibia, and precisely on that notion of, we don't want linguaphobia. We want multilingualism as a vital resource, and working with a country which is developing its own resources and its own heritage strategies to maintain what is an incredibly rich history of multilingualism, whilst at the same time negotiating what it means to work in a global world, I think is going to be the next challenge for TML. Right. On that, I'll pass it over to Barbara.
Before we pass the word on to Barbara, I'd just like to say, generally speaking, we do speak as a team. I've long since lost a sense of self working for TML. So we do speak all the time as a we. And of course, the conference is part of the whole project, and it is a team effort. I would, however, like to say thank you to Barbara for all the work that the excellence of her work, both in the conceptualization and the organization of everything. So, Barbara.
Thank you, Charles. And actually, I would like to start with my warmest thanks to the British School at Rome and to the director, Christopher Smith, because I feel that so much of my work has actually started here. And the support that Christopher Smith has given to my project and my trajectory, following very closely my intellectual development and all I have built with Charles and Loredana and Jenny and Derek, that is not here yet, has been very important for my professional trajectory. So thank you so much for this. I'm so glad that this conference is happening here. I think that I've been corresponding with all of you and actually with many others that responded to our call for paper, and that was a very exciting result of the of our call, of the call that we launched. And unfortunately, we weren't able to include everyone, but for us that was a very meaningful sign of the impact, of the potential impact that the framework that we are building can have, and of what we can still build during these days. So I think we have put together a fantastic panel of outstanding keynote speakers, but also of very exciting panels that mix early career and more established scholars and really put together in conversation. So I hope that all of you will enjoy the bilingual or translingual discussions that will be going on in the panels. And that will showcase, I think, also the combination of expertise and perspective that come from different disciplines into this conference. And I really have to give you a few practical announcements. So from here, I will ask to our chairs really to keep the times of the different papers, and also to all of you, not only to participate into the discussion in the room, but also to participate to the discussion on Twitter and on Facebook. We have, some of us are already tweeting, have already started, and we have an hashtag #TransmodLangs, which appears also on your conference program and on the beautiful postcard that each one of you has in his or her own conference pack. So as Loredana said, we will be really grateful if you can write a few feedback in that postcard and post it in the box that is on the registration desk at the entrance here downstairs. That registration desk is our new registration desk, so also during our lunchtime, if someone of you wants to register for the dinner, for our conference dinner of Thursday, you are very welcome to do that at that desk. And the two main venues of the conference are this room, the lecture theater, and the seminar room upstairs. And toilets and facilities are available downstairs here by the foyer and upstairs by the seminar room. I think that we will start here with the parallel sessions, and at 12 o'clock we will meet here again for the keynote lecture of Professor Ruth Benguiat, who is here with us now. So I think this is all, also in terms of practicalities. I really hope you enjoy the conference and the buzz of this event, and welcome to the BSR. Thanks.